Hello. Welcome to tonight's bedtime story by Lucid Tales. I hope your day has been gentle and full of softness, but whether it has been warm breezes or howling winds for you, it's time to relax now. Find somewhere comfortable, maybe your bed or a favorite armchair, and make sure you're ready for sleep. Run your fingers over your scalp or through your hair if you can, and feel the relaxation in all the little muscles, the little loosening that means it's time for bed. Tonight's story is Perchance to Dream, written by me, Sukie Baker, as a part of Genre Fluid, a collection of short stories which will be released in 2 days' time on the 27th of November. I remember the day I died. It was quite sad, actually. One morning I woke up and I simply wasn't there. I'd never felt more alone. I got up nonetheless, went downstairs to make my morning cup of coffee and sat and ate breakfast by myself. One bowl, one spoon, one portion of cornflakes. That at least was normal. I hadn't really eaten that much when I was alive. But I missed the companionable silence of having myself around. Now the quiet was just empty. The silence of nobody around rather than nobody talking. The significance of being alone didn't escape me, of course. But right then I was a bit too shocked to really process it. To grieve, I guess. For a brief time I actually wondered if I'd gone out without telling myself. Ridiculous, right? I called in sick and went out anyway. If anyone recognized me, they'd understand why I didn't feel up to working today. There was a sort of general understanding for that kind of thing back then. Outside, the world was just starting to wake up. Birds flitting from tree to tree and singing of love or something. People whose working day started half an hour after mine were visible in the slow lighting of windows in the street, clouds of steam erupting from bathroom vents. The air was brisk, chill. I still had on my dressing gown. Somehow I'd thought far enough to discard my slippers and put on a pair of boots, even if they were Wellingtons. I imagined the comedic figure I must cut if anyone happened to glance out of their window and see me. It made me chuckle, and I turned to share it, forgetting I was alone. The unfamiliar melancholy returned. I walked on through the park, grateful for the Wellingtons as I kicked up wet autumn leaves and left dark trails on the dewy grass. My feet would have been soaked in anything else. The hem of my dressing gown already was. I wasn't sure of where I was going, just that I needed to get there. Coddywampling, you might say. I spent at least half an hour sat on the swings in the play park, swinging idly and listening to their melancholic creaking. They weren't really designed for someone of my weight. It didn't feel quite right without someone to push me anyway. The children were on their way to school by then, with their elders walking stoically beside them, seeing them safely to the classroom. Some of them stared at me curiously or fearfully. I waved, but all but one little girl looked away. I understood why. It's unnerving seeing young people out alone in play parks, particularly if they're wearing dressing gowns and Wellingtons at 8 in the morning. I guessed I probably looked like a drunk or drug addict. If they'd come close enough, though, my breath would have smelled of coffee rather than booze, harsh reality rather than fantasy and dreams. I looked across the park to see 4 people walking a dog. The younger two, about my age, were arm in arm and laughing about something, while the older couple eyed each other with awkward weariness and a kind of regretful patience. Sometimes I envy that funny allo-romantic lot, those who engage in that seemingly worldwide search for romance and sexual partnership. But then I think about how much easier it is to fit 2 people in an apartment built for one than it is to fit 4, and I'm glad I'm me. My life has been made significantly easier by my lack of interest in that arena. That morning it would have been nice, though, to have had someone to wake up next to. Someone who'd know. But it didn't happen that way. So it goes. The next day, of course, I couldn't delay going into work any longer, so I showed up. My co-workers were very kind, in that hushed way that people are when death comes calling. Told me they were sorry for my loss. Was I sure I was feeling up to working? Was there anything they could do for me? It was all very sweet, but really it set my teeth on edge. One can only experience so many shocked expressions and unnecessary apologies in a single day before starting to lose one's grip. The following days were much the same, though by that point I'd started to severely notice the differences between myself and everyone else. I started to count 10 co-workers instead of 5, 2 customers instead of 1. I paid closer attention to my regulars and the ways they'd changed. One of them came in 3 days in a row, and every time she looked different. One morning, a long broken nose and missing a few back teeth. The next, a sad, forlorn look, but a warm, full smile. On the 3rd day, she was dead too. We didn't see her for a couple of days, and I felt a few brief pangs of sympathy. Empathy, even. Maybe I was even slightly relieved I wasn't alone, as unattractive as that is. Several days later, she came back in, and she was alive again. I stared at her. The broken nose was back, this time on both of her. "How did you do it?" I whispered as I handed over her usual black coffee with vanilla. She grinned broadly despite her 2 black eyes, and I saw those back teeth, 2 missing. "You remembered?" I didn't know if she meant the coffee order or that she'd been dead yesterday. Her smile dropped and she leaned in close. I leaned in too. "I left him," she whispered. "Couldn't stay, could I, after seeing that?" She shuddered. "I keep going back, but that was it. I can't let him kill me. As soon as I decided, for real, I came back to myself. Knew he'd try to do it anyway from the look of me, but really, I guess what's a broken nose and some teeth missing compared with missing all of me?" She gave me a sympathetic look and a worried smile. She felt somehow tenuous, liminal. She wanted to go back, but she couldn't. It's so much harder to betray yourself when you see the living proof of it right in front of your eyes. "Maybe you'll get yourself back too," she suggested before moving away. Her elder walked close behind her, that crooked, heeled nose almost pressed to her neck. She would not let her go back. I worked in a haze for the rest of the day. I had not known, never been told. Why weren't we told this? Once your life ended, that was it. You had a use-by date, a best before. When I clocked out, I wandered aimlessly. My life, as it was, would kill me, or I'd die of some disease. I tried desperately to remember what I'd looked like the day before I died. My face slipped from my mind, hovered just out of reach. Had I been thin? Fat? Had I had a purple nose and bloated pouches under my eyes? Did I look stressed? Sad? Peaceful? I found myself back at that play park and sat on the swings again, ignoring the children squawking around me on the climbing frames. I had been thin, I decided, but soft, lacking in tone. I had had clear skin, free of makeup or blemishes, long hair tied back and grey clothes. I had looked not peaceful, bored, tired out, worn thin. I wish I had thought to ask myself if I still worked at the same cafe, pouring the same drinks, received a nod or a shake of the head in return. But it was too late now. All those words left unsaid. All that silent communication missed. I should have listened to that silence more. Something had to change. The next day I called in sick again. It was a difficult time. I could get away with it. I sat on my one chair in my kitchen and drank a hot chocolate. I didn't usually, but what harm could it do me now? What did I want? I asked myself. What had I wanted back before I fell into drudgery and boredom and notice periods and rent payments and keeping bread on the table? I had wanted something bigger, something exciting. I had wanted something. What did I want now? The answer, which came quickly, was surprisingly easy. I wanted to be braver. Being careful had not given me my long life. In fact, I had died relatively young. So what was stopping me? I didn't wait. Within an hour I was in town at a walk-in appointment at a barber's. "Cut it all off," I told them. "You sure?" he asked teasingly. "All of it?" "All of it," I confirmed. I left with my old hair in a plastic bag, all 2 feet of it. What was I going to do with it? Who knew? It was mine. In all honesty, I later donated it to a wig making program. What did I need it for? But that didn't come until later. I went out to a bar and drank some ridiculous cocktail with 3 names and a sparkler in it. "Celebrating something?" the bartender asked me warily, eyeing the empty space beside me where I should have been. "Yes," I replied, and drank. I came up with a new list of rules. 1. Fear no danger. If your destiny cannot change, you have nothing to lose. You cannot die before your use-by date. 2. If your destiny can change, greet yourself warmly wherever you are when you meet again. 3. No more rules. It seemed so simple, and in a way it was. I carefully calculated my finances. Old habits die hard. And I worked out that I had enough money to buy a return plane ticket anywhere in the world if I took a budget airline. Then I went one step further and took it all out in cash. I was still courteous, so I called work to let them know I quit. They were understandably shocked, but I steeled myself and refused to go in to work my notice. They let me take it as holiday. Another week's wages. That was good. Even with my new rules, I wanted emergency backup. I illegally sublet my flat for the rest of my contract and handed the keys over 2 days later. It had come furnished. I owned nothing but my clothes, knickknacks, and pot plants. The plants I gave to the new tenant as a gift. The knickknacks I put in a charity shop, except for a handful of particularly precious ones who either came with me or got buried beneath a tree in the park in a watertight box. I had no family to leave them with, you see. None I was willing to visit anyway. I winnowed my clothes down to 1 backpack and put the rest in a clothes deposit bin. The man in the shop was very perturbed to see me rifling through my big suitcase to see what I could fit into the backpack he had just sold me. Then I was ready. Despite travelling so rarely, I had kept my passport in date. I walked toward the edge of town, toward the airport, and stopped halfway up the slip road to the motorway. I stuck out my thumb. The wait was agonizing. I questioned my sanity, my intelligence, my trust in strangers. I tested my own patience far more than the stream of cars that didn't pull over. I waved and smiled. It took forever. Then a blue car, I will always remember this, saw me, slammed on its brakes and pulled into the lay-by. A friendly face looked out. "Where are you going?" "Dover," I replied. "Hop in." After that it was easier. I knew to trust that someone would stop. Even on bare roads with no one for miles in either direction, someone would drive past and stop eventually. It was easier perhaps because there was only one of me. Usually one would need at least 2 spare seats for a hitchhiker, but I was compact, alone. Perhaps it made people more kindly toward me too. I grew used to it. The waiting and the boredom and the ache in my arms. The exultation when a car slowed. I trusted everyone, and everyone, it seemed, trusted me. Well, almost everyone. There were a few hairy moments, but they were vastly outweighed by the kindness of most of the strangers I met. I travelled a long way. After a touristic stint around Western Europe, I hitchhiked my way east and south, through the Mediterranean, Greece, Turkey. I loved Istanbul. Finally, I was spat out of a lorry on the far side, in Asia. It didn't look much different from the countries I had just left, really. I felt more nervous there for a short while. I don't know why. Racist fear-mongering back home, I guess. But Asia was kind to me, as Europe had been. I headed east, down through Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. India was magnificent. I climbed mountains, different from the ones where I'd learned to snowboard in France, and learned to dance by the South Sea. I was amused by how much travel to other travellers seemed to include sex. As if they could taste 100 different varieties of it in 100 different countries, even though they primarily only had sex with each other. I ignored it entirely. Friends found me, travelled alongside me for a while here and there. It was humbling and delightful to realise I was not alone, not the only one circumnavigating the globe on their thumb, but easier alone. After all, everyone else came in pairs, or most of them. Those who were like me, just young and nothing else, solitary figures, stayed with me longer. We understood. I no longer wore grey, except for the dust. My hair was short and messily cut, and I wore bracelets and ankle strings. My clothing was a riot of colour, tangled up in a bright mess. I had tattoos, and a nose piercing. In the mirror I was someone else, but still I was alone. I was very happy. Sometimes it didn't even register how lonely I was without myself standing stoically by my side. I began to believe I would never find myself again, that my destiny could not change. I went across the sea, to Australia and New Zealand, determined to be braver still. I went skiing, snowboarding, rock climbing. I learned to surf. Scuba entered my life, and I swam with sharks and jellyfish, daring their tendrils to come close. I bungee jumped and dove off cliffs and rode a giant trapeze swing across a canyon. Nothing killed me. In death I had become more alive than I had ever been. I made my peace with it. Perhaps my destiny could have changed, but I had gone about it the wrong way. Maybe I had never had a chance. But I wouldn't change it. I had lived more since I died than in all the years of my life before that. If my time was going to be up sooner than others, what of it? At least I'd had fun. I fell into the habit of meditating every day and stretching out my tired body and tight shoulders. I returned to India. The Americas called, but I wasn't ready for them yet. I compromised and returned to Europe, finally reaching the sea. I settled on Tenerife for half a year, slowing down at last. My body thanked me for it. Friends gathered around me. I had never known I was likeable before I died. One night I was invited to some party celebrating the full moon, and for once I said yes. Music pulsed gently out into the night from the cave where it roared loud and the bass rolled through my stomach. I sat on the cliff and looked out over the sea, where the moonlight shimmered on the water. I did not feel so alone anymore. Somehow over the years I had become used to the fact that where everyone else had 4 feet, 2 heads, 2 pairs of hands for dancing and holding, I was complete within one body. I wondered briefly where I would go, what I would do next. But it didn't matter. I would do something. It would come in its own time. Someone settled on the rock beside me and sat silently watching the moon. It arced high above us, its face resplendent and glowing. I was grateful it was a clear night. The water rippled gently below, waves coming into the shore and sucking back out before returning. The quiet endured. If a silence can feel familiar, different, that one did. It stretched thick and warm between us, like an old blanket we pulled around our shoulders, the way I used to feel when it was just the 2 of me, alone in my flat. It felt like home. I looked up. Good night. Sleep well. And I will see you tomorrow for another bedtime story.